Thanks for choosing this free Anfield Index podcast. If you'd prefer to listen to this or any of our other shows without adverts, then now's the time to check out Anfield Index Pro. With AI Pro, you can supercharge your entire listening experience. You'll not only get all of our podcasts without the ads, but you'll have them far faster with our quick publish feature available exclusively for subscribers. AI Pro also puts you in the heart of our sound studio, with an option to listen to many of our shows live and interact with the podcasters in real time as the shows are recording. Upgrading couldn't be easier. AI Pro is available on all popular podcast platforms, and we have our own apps for Apple and Android. Just head on over to AnfieldIndexPro.com and get started today.
Welcome to Scouser, Tommies and Anfield Index. I'm Jim Boardman, and today I'm joined by Tony Evans. On this show, what we try to do is give you a feel for what it's like to be a Liverpool fan when you've grown up with the best club in the world on your doorstep, when you've grown up with Liverpool Football Club on your doorstep, when it's what it's like to be a Liverpool fan when the city of Liverpool is the city that means the most to you. You know, it's maybe a different opinion or a different perspective, a different view, a different feel for what it's like to be a Red who still fell in love with the club but maybe fell in love from a distance. And I think it's a bit sad at the moment that there's kind of stuff kicking off, mainly on the internet, usually on the internet. It's always the internet where stuff kicks off these days, I think. And it's kind of pitting local Reds with non-local Reds, out of towners against locals, and it never ends well. And most of the time these things are kicking off and it's just a sort of, it's like almost like a minority view from either side of the fence, because there's always a fence appears when it's on social media. People are always entrenched in one position or another. And most of the time, it's just exaggerated out of belief. So I think this is something we're going to try and do in a future show, talk about it from our side and how we feel, and maybe, try and make some sense of what's going on. We'll see. Try and do that if we can. But I think the main thing to do is to say, look, we all need to stick together. We all support Liverpool. We all want Liverpool to do well. And, you know, maybe rather than being angry all the time with each other, we need to be angry about the game itself, about the authorities that run it, and the people who've let it turn into what it has turned into, all the negative stuff. You know, let's complain to FIFA and UEFA. Let's not complain to each other or at each other. Let's have a moan at the FA and the Premier League ownership, if you like, than complain at fans who just live in a different city, in a different country to you or wherever. Because if you're Red, then what matters to you when we're talking about the Reds should be that football club, and I hope it does. Now, it's not the first time we've had turmoil, and I think some of the turmoil at the moment is down to takeover talk. FSG announced before Christmas that they were looking for investment. That was headlined in the first place that announced this story as Liverpool going to be sold, which I think was an exaggeration on what the actual statement said. But who knows? Are they trying to sell up? Are they just trying to sell a bit? Are they not even trying? Are they just basically say, look, if anyone wants a bit, come and talk to us. Here you go. Give us a good price and we might let you have some. Who knows? The truth is nothing's really happening now, is it? Except for all of us fighting amongst each other and the club not doing really well. And this is just a recipe for animosity. And I was thinking back to the last time we were taken over and the time before that. I mean, the first time we were taken over that I remember was, of course, when Hicks and Gillette came in promising all kinds of great things, spades in the ground in no time at all, no debt on the club, and they even threw money into a transfer kitty, and all of a sudden it really felt like we were going somewhere. Didn't last long, of course. They were in debt. The debt was basically on the club, and yeah, the club nearly went under. Along came FSG, and let's face it, rescued us from a bad situation. Now, whatever your views on FSG, I can't think anyone can actually say that they are worse than Hicks and Gillette. If you're saying that, then you're really just trying to cause an argument. But I think it feels bad at the moment to be a Red because things aren't going well. And being a Red is a roller coaster ride. You're on ups and downs so often. And we're definitely on a down at the moment. But if you look back to all the stuff that happened in, last time there was a takeover, they were some dark days. And I think as dark as they feel now, Tony, these dark days, I mean, we've been through a lot worse than we're going through now.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, initially, it's drumbled on for a couple of years, hasn't it? When David Moyes realised that he came to believe that he couldn't run the club, he couldn't, be in a sustainable manner. And it wasn't too different then. Chelsea had come in and changed the landscape with the spends and Roman Abramovich, in the same way City have done that now. And you had an ownership is going, what we need to do is get new investment to compete. And the investments obviously come from Tom Hicks and George Gillette, who, initially everything looked good. We reached the Champions League final, lost to Milan 2007, bought Torres, and it was like, oh yeah, everything seemed positive. But then the global credit crunch hit, and that was the end of their financial firepower. And what's really interesting is that Tom Hicks Jr., he said, when I asked him once about the value they were setting on the club, because they wanted 600 million. And that was like, at the time, it was like, you're joking. It's ridiculous. And he said, within 10 years, he said, they'll be giving us 200 million before a ball's being kicked. And he meant television. And I was like, get out of here. Can't be true. And sure enough, he was right. They knew what they were doing with the stars. They just didn't have the money to maintain it.
Yeah, because that's it. I mean, it started out, didn't it? George Gillette he was interested in buying the club on his own, couldn't do it, brought Hicks in. And of course, that in a way was another big issue as well, because not only wherever was happening with the money, it was that 50-50 thing where, they had to agree on things. They could sort of veto each other's ideas, and it quite clearly got personal after a while. I mean, you're talking about Hicks then. I mean, behind the scenes, Hicks was basically saying that they were given the impression that they were the wealthier ones of the two, and it was Gillette holding them back and things. But you can't help but think, if that was really the case, and you really were okay for money yourselves and it was him holding you back, you could have bought him out. You could have bought, another 25% off him, maybe over the odds. But if that 200 million was coming for TV money in 10 years, you'd get it back. But as you say, the banks closed them down and they didn't give a chance. But then I remember that one thing that wound me up, I think, later on, when all the sale had gone through, was how well Royal Bank of Scotland seems to have done out of Liverpool. They were, I don't know, to me they kind of stood in the way of a sale being done. I might be wrong, but it just felt that way. And even when the club was taken over, I'm pretty sure there was sort of provisions in there that FSG pretty much had to agree to staying with Royal Bank of Scotland once they'd taken over, or the club's banking staying with Royal Bank of Scotland. And I get, there was a credit crunch, there was a crisis going on in the banking industry and all the rest of it, but it's unusual for banks to be poor, isn't it? It just feels like they definitely played a part in the troubles we had.
Oh, definitely. And they were trying to maximise is profit the wrong word? No, profit. They were maximising their profit out of it. And they were up to all kinds of shenanigans. It was a very, very strange time. And, we had so many competing factions. It was untrue. And the disinformation that was coming out the club was mind-boggling. Oh yeah. At the moment, people are complaining because they don't know what's going on, and that's probably because there's very little going on.
Yeah.
But it's very different to back then, when there was like 10 or 15 liars feeding you different lines on a daily basis.
Yeah, all with different vested interests in some way. I mean, even and there were people who were sort of maybe telling you things or saying things or believed things, and they were trying to give information out for what they thought was the right reasons. I think the amount of times I'd hear of kind of ex-players indirectly about the bad stuff going on at the club, and then you look back and think they've been fed a line by someone here. Okay, I was going to try and leave his name out of it for a while, but I think well before there was any real talk about the club being in financial trouble, I think it was maybe the early days of some potential issues, but they were still kind of playing it down. And long before he was publicly revealed, I remember seeing Christian Perslow in a hotel talking to Tom Hicks Jr. And, well, he was definitely, there was something, we've talked about him still, and I suppose we've got to watch what we say to some extent, but Cecil, as we came to lovingly call him, there was something going on with him stirring the pot, definitely from early on. And, even to the point where he was one of the people who was causing so much division, because he seemed to be going off to players to say things and then going off to Rafa to say something else. And then I can remember a day, and I think you and I were on the phone that week quite a bit with other people as well. And he phoned me up one day he started off the call by telling me that if I told anyone else about this call, he'd basically, he knows people, he'd have me ridiculed and he'd have me made to look foolish and all this kind of stuff, which, I was quaking so much as I was taking this call with laughter. But the story he told me then was different to the story he told you. You and I and others were comparing notes, and he was just basically going round saying what he thought people wanted to hear, but totally not realising that as he's going into all this detail about the big things, he's messing up on all the small details. And I don't know, he must have been something to do with all the information early on, the misinformation that was coming out.
Well, one of those things that people, so particularly people who are not involved in in the city and all that, they don't realise that Liverpool's a village.
Yeah.
It's the worst possible village. And everyone talks to each other. So if you've got someone who's telling one story and then it turns out that he's told a different story to someone else, then it's going to get out there and everyone's going to know about it before long. So that was happening all the time, and it was amazing. And again, when people come into the club, sort of when a bit later on when Jen Chang come in. That was my first bit of advice as communications director, is don't tell anyone anything that you don't want everyone to know, because they will before, it'll get round. So that there was an element of that. And when you've got various people trying to play off each other, it makes for a fairly toxic mix. And blimey, did it get toxic?
Well, it got toxic enough. I mean, you're saying that about, quite obviously, as I'll talk. My biggest concern at the time, and you were the same, was always,
are you that person who has everything? The coolest merch and those must-have fan threads? Well, over at our Anfield Index shop, we've gone that extra mile when it comes to pimping up your Liverpool collection. From our popular range of bespoke design t-shirts, sweaters, hoodies and hats, to our signature edition mugs, prints and coasters, all provided with fast worldwide shipping. We have something for every red. We also stock official LFC merchandise and are licensed with the Premier League and UEFA to sell official iron-on shirt badges and sleeve patches. As a listener to this podcast, you can get 10% off everything with coupon code AIPRO10. Just head over to AnfieldIndex.shop or find us on Etsy by searching for Anfield Index.
You don't want this club to go under. You want it to thrive. You sort of, your list of priorities was, if we were sort of, if we were Everton at the moment, if we were sort of big fans of Everton at the moment, and still do to some extent, we'd be extremely worried about that club, and we'd be, trying to get to the truth and trying to find out what it is and seeing through as many lies as we could, because we wanted the club to be well. And I think that's what so many people were doing, to the extent that we had a dossier written about us, and I know we've talked about it a little bit on here, but it's definitely genuine. I know where it came from. I know who got it out of the club, so to speak. So I know it's genuine. And the dossier was basically comparing certain people who were fighting for the sake of the club, trying to get to the truth, trying to stop the club being messed about, and it branded people as members of the Khmer Rouge.
Yeah, it was an extreme comparison. A genocidal group that was responsible for the murders of upwards of 1 million people, probably a lot more. And of course, a bunch of dopes who were wanted to keep the football club alive. It certainly was real, because later on, during the when Fenway Sports Group took over, someone from the club phoned me and officially apologised for us, because obviously it was leaked during their term. And I said, it's not your fault. You weren't involved. We know who were to blame of it. And they put their initials on it, for God's sake. So we knew, but some of the stuff that said in there was absolutely amazing. The Guardian didn't run a piece on it because what the lawyers have advised them that I was in a position to sue, because it said I think it said something to the effect I was an admitted football hooligan who caused trouble at Heysel, and went to America to escape the consequences. And I'm like, well, hang on, they've got the timing completely wrong. And I think, I was like to the Guardian, why didn't you just phone me? there's no way I would have sued on this. But yeah, I mean, it made some absolutely appalling allegations, and what was best about it was the paranoia. It linked together lots of people who actually hadn't spoken or met to each other. It didn't actually get to the network of people who were actually involved, and there's people who were on that list who didn't deserve to be on it, and who were still trading off it. One of them. And there's people who never made it who were like, why wasn't I on it?
Yeah,
I deserve to be on it. And it's quite funny because you look back now, and here we are. How many years later? 13 years later, and it's just, you think it's inconceivable that people at a football club could be coming up essentially with blacklists. But yeah, sure enough, they did, and it's one of those, I think, lessons for Everton fans who are obviously are going to be in the next few months, I suspect, embroiled in a struggle to keep their club in a reasonable state. That it's there are people in these situations who are capable of things which, frankly, you wouldn't believe when you read about it.
I think as well, like one of the maddest parts of it was when you read it, and it kind of sort of dates it to some extent. But everyone in those days, Twitter was in its infancy, and Facebook was the thing where you just listened to you just saw pictures of your auntie's dog and things like that. There was no, the activism in a way was all kind of done sort of face to face, friend to friend, phone to phone, and on forums, because they'd actually gone to the effort of finding out who people were on different forums, like the Liverpool Way, the Rattle, or RAOTL. It's kind of not really part of the fanzine, is it? But it's sort of got the same name. All of these places, some of which you had to be members to actually get on there, so you had to kind of almost be not quite be vetted, but you couldn't just. They'd been sort of set up so that they weren't going to be infiltrated by Manx every time we played them, because they used to like to come on and do Hillsborough things, didn't they, just before we played them on forums. But they'd gone to the extent of like working out who people's real names were on all the forums. So that list had everyone's sort of forum handles, because you weren't known as like, you weren't known as Tony Evans on a forum. You'd have like a nickname, and they'd gone to that extent where, it must have taken some hours for that quite senior member of Liverpool staff to do that.
Oh yeah, I mean the amount of effort they put into was like, it's amazing, and for that amount of effort, for the rewards and the veracity of it to be so paltry was absolutely mind-boggling. But yeah, it was a weird time, and we've got obviously the Fenway Sports Group, the FSG, outers at the moment. But it just doesn't seem to be much of a comparison, really. I mean, that seems to be a Twitter thing where, people are, I love there was supposed to be a protest march last week, wasn't there? And the turnout was brilliant. And in a sense, it tells you everything, because, everyone wants to think all the time that Scousers are predisposed to protest and that we're just up for a fight all the time. And it's not true. No. What we want to do is be treated with decency, and we respond to injustice. We respond to when things are not right, and that's when we'll protest. And frankly, Fenway Sports Group have done nothing except run the club prudently in a time when you probably need to spend like a sovereign state. Yeah. And so they've done it. And while I've never been completely sold on them, so I'm always amused by the fact that I was for a long time was regarded as their number one enemy. At the same time, when I was collaborating with John Henry on his open letter to supporters. But I've always been extremely critical of them when they've been wrong.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, though. But you're critical in a constructive way, which is important.
Yeah, I hope so. And but they have not been bad custodians of the club. There could be a lot worse. As I say, we live through Gillette and Hicks, but yeah, clearly they've made a decision that their time to operate like they're operating is over, and it won't work that way. And I've known since 2015 when in a conversation with John Henry that they were looking at some point to get out, and that was probably right from the beginning. They took a view on that, and so it's not completely unexpected. but especially since the now Newcastle and Manchester City's position, it's so I think that they've realised, they've thought to themselves, we can't do this in a way we want to, because believe it or not, and people don't, but Henry very much wants to win. He's enjoyed, both for the Red Sox and Liverpool, the reflected glamour it's given him.
Yeah,
it's he as he once said, he was always a nerd. He was never, to put in American terms, a jock. And but he got a sense of what it was like to be a superstar when he won, with the Red Sox. And he said, when Liverpool win the league, it'll be even bigger. As it was in the middle of COVID, so it wasn't quite as big. But even so, he understood the desire to win, the importance of, if you do own a club, of winning. So never be sure. It wasn't about just keeping ticking over in the bottom line. They wanted Liverpool to be successful, and to be fair, they brought a fair amount of success. I mean, I think sometimes in this discourse it gets forgotten that we didn't win the league for 30 years, and then we did. And hang on, doesn't someone deserve a bit of credit for that? And obviously, Jurgen Klopp, massive amounts. But the ownership and the way they backed him, I mean, certainly in the first 5 years of the way when they took over the club, they didn't run it in a way that I considered satisfactory. But certainly the Klopp era was significantly better on so many points,
Yeah, it has been. I think we forget. I mean, that process you mentioned then at the start as well. The first I knew about it was when I saw people telling me it hadn't happened. But if I'd have walked past the place where it was meant to happen, I wouldn't have known there was a protest either, because there was nobody turned up. And I think in Liverpool, the thing as well we've learnt to do is to pick our fights and to pick our moments and to keep our powder dry until we need to use it, because we've had to do that, because we've.
Hello, I'm here to annoy you. I'm here to annoy you into listening to more of me and more of others on EPL Index. We don't just have the Anfield Index stuff. We've got EPL Index as well, which covers the entirety of the Premier League. And we have 3 podcasts and a whole bunch of really good writing on EPLindex.com. The podcasts are my own two-footed podcast, which is every day at 4 p.m, Monday through Friday, covering the whole league. We have A Tad Predictable, hosted by Tadiwa. You know Tadiwa, he does Anfield Index. He presents A Tad Predictable before every Premier League match week. And then Kevin DeVries and his crew on the EPL Roundtable, they're every week after the Premier League match week. So make sure you listen to everything we're doing on EPL Index and follow us there on Twitter at EPL Index. Thank you. Bye-bye.
We get ignored sometimes. So what you sometimes have to kind of just sit back, wait, gather the evidence, find out what's really going on. Is there as big a problem as you think, and then get it dealt with. And that stuff about the division, though, that we had real protests when Hicks and Gillette were messing the club about. We had real protests, and I think one of the most striking moments for me was when, I don't know about you, but to me personally, if someone sort of stuck a Union Jack on the floor in front of me and I was, in front of the door I would wipe my feet on the Union Jack quite happily. It wouldn't bother me in the slightest. My feet needed wiping, the Union Jack would be fine. I'm not worried, I don't mind. Mm-hmm. But people were burning the US flag, and the outrage that got, the attention that got was unreal. Now, I'm not bothered about flags, and I genuinely don't understand the outrage about it, but I do believe that there's outrage about it. And that, again, was one of these sort of pivotal moments, I think, where for Hicks and Gillette in America, any hope they had of being these great businessmen was starting to be, Liverpool was a long way away, but now it wasn't. Liverpool was getting into the faces.
Well, again, yeah, and the whole thing about the internet for the first time, the internet terrorism thing,
Yes.
It's they were finding. They were finding things in their inboxes in the morning, which which they didn't enjoy, and some of it was unpleasant and over the top. You've got to admit, but certainly they found themselves in a situation where they weren't prepared for the fan reaction, and they weren't prepared for the way the Liverpool fan base responded, and much of it was great. Some of it was a bit over the top, but much of it was great, and it made a big point to them that they couldn't operate in the way they were operating.
Yeah, I think that's the thing with that kind of protest as well. I always think to myself that if you sort of, like, there's some sporting events where you'll have, say, 6, 7, 8, 9 judges, whatever, and they always take the best and the worst mark off, and then they give you an average of what's left. And I think with protests like that, take off the most extreme one way and the most extreme the other, and you've probably got a pretty good sort of idea of what people really think. And that to me, the bottom line was, we felt helpless in some ways, but then we didn't, because then we realised the power we had in our strength, in strength in numbers. And obviously, the time came, I think, where I think even if Hicks and Gillette had somehow pulled a miracle and got some money, that for them to stay on as any kind of ownership, in any kind of control at least, it just became untenable. But behind the scenes, to make that happen, obviously there were these official lines about the club being put up for sale. I think the first one, it was just looking for investment, wasn't it? And then the second one, it was up for sale. I'm trying to think when Perslow first came in, but there were all these lines going on publicly, but obviously privately, they're trying to get the best deal they can. But there was no one with cash, because you couldn't borrow money to buy the club. There was no one with cash coming forward. But as time went on, there were. But I just remember there was, again, when we're talking about the lies, we had this sort of briefing against Rafa. There were certain people trying to brief against Rafa because they were worried about his power. They're paranoid about a load of people using forums on the internet. You can imagine how paranoid they were about Rafa, who just basically spoke his mind to some extent. I don't think he ever said everything he really felt, but he certainly said enough to get them worried. But then on top of that, they were just worrying about, there was just so much sort of misinformation coming, from the two owners. They were kind of briefing against each other sometimes, but then briefing together. And there were even times I wondered whether the whole thing about them hating each other was actually a scam. It was just so much misinformation. It was difficult to keep on top of it. But I do think, in all things considered, any sort of relationship they had was literally purely on a business footing, and they just did not want to spend a minute with each other.
No, it got to that point, didn't it? And it was quite funny that how much they hated each other at the end, and they were trying to screw each other financially and leave each other to hang out to dry. It's and of course none of this is good when you're a football club. But what was, at the same time, United were having their struggles with the Glazers, who clearly were more financially solvent and have been able to hang in, and ironically, they're up for the sale at the same time as Liverpool are. It's the irony of that. Finally, but one of the things is, we were looking to get a common front with United fans, and that proved harder than you'd think.
Yeah,
we did little bits and bobs with them, but it's the mutual suspicions were too great.
Yeah.
I was like, you know what? There is a bigger good. There is a more important principle here than just hating each other. We can go back to hating each other on the pitch if we secure, our futures. And United won't like to hear it, but like it's the bottom line in their protest was green and gold until we start winning again.
Yeah, and the green and gold that you can also buy from the club shop was one of my favourite bits of all that movement.
Oh yeah.
Lining the pockets of the club again. But yeah, they were. That we're different. Same sort of goals, and I think there's definitely a core of United fans who would definitely be up for kind of help, joining forces with us. And I spoke with plenty of them, but as you say, there's still that kind of that kind of suspicion about them. Much the same as there would be with Everton now. As Liverpool and Everton fans, though, we have fought together because we fought, as people, maybe more than fans, we fought for justice for Hillsborough as much as we can. And I think it's that fighting spirit that this city has, that other cities, I might be wrong, I don't think many other cities have that exactly the same spirit as Liverpool in terms of fighting. And as you say as well, it gives sometimes people look at it the wrong way. But one of the other irritants at the time as well was that when there was a need to protest, there was this big sort of fight between fans almost of whether or not it was right to protest in the ground. Yet, that's the stage. That's the stage that Liverpool play on. That's the place that gets on TV. And it used to wind me up a bit that, okay, I get it, we don't want to be too disruptive, but the idea you can't bring a banner into the ground was one of the most laughable moments for me. That, you need to tell the world what's going on, and what better way than primetime TV across the world.
It's the same sort of logic as like, they shouldn't be striking because like it inconveniences people. Yeah. Well, it's meant to.
Never.
That's the point. Unless you actually express yourself and express your disapproval, it's going to be like this. One of the things I thought about the Everton banners in their protests, they were all a bit too wordy and they all wanted to rhyme. And I'm like, stop it. Like, I think one of the most effective banners that was produced for us was like, obviously the Yanks out said it simply, but like the Perslow penis was a classic.
That was my favourite, yeah.
We all love that. But, it's like, keep things simple, make sure people know what you're asking for, and make sure people know who the enemies are. And if you do that, there's a better chance that, your message will get across, because sometimes it can be lost.
Yeah, and I think I hate giving any credit, but the reason why we're having lots of strikes in this country is because of these like 3-word slogans and things that were used by the current party that's in power. I can't think it's the same government because it keeps changing who's in charge of it. But all this sort of get Brexit done and all these sort of short slogans that were empty. Basically, what was being said, there was no sort of substance to it. But the way they worked is they got these things out there, people were using them, and the next thing you know, we're being sort of sold off, dumped and made to look a really bad country and all the rest of it because we're no longer part of the EU. And obviously even they're admitting now that was wrong. But yeah, from Everton fans, I agree, some of those really are wordy and they're clever, but it's more like they need to write headlines on the banners, don't they? And then the other stuff can come underneath. You can explain that later on. I think also though something that helped us, and I don't think Liverpool fans can ever sort of underestimate, as fans, we've had an absolute hatred of the media at times, but it's not the media is such a simple phrase. I mean, we're the media, the fact that we're doing these podcasts even, but it's not, it's been our help as well. And it's just trying to distinguish between, I don't know, the sort of dark side of the media, the sort of typical sort of evil journalist type person that you'll see in many a sort of even a Hollywood movie, the one who's up to no good. But then the same side where, the same people who are trying to uncover the people who are up to no good. And I think we got a hell of a lot of backing as fans from a hell of a lot of the mainstream press in this country, which I think helped us massively. As much as the internet terrorists got the ball rolling and kept it going, those getting on into the mainstream media and reported so often in an understanding way was massive for us. I know you were part of that, but it wasn't just you.
I think it's really important to understand the way the media works, and the reality is most people who are involved, are very keen to expose wrongdoers, and because it's like. I always think when I look at like sort of things like police corruption and all that, I think to myself, how must they mustn't have gone into the business thinking that. Yeah. They must have gone into the business thinking I can help, right? And it's the same a bit with the media. You go into the business thinking, the reason I'm working in newspapers now is ultimately because of Hillsborough, because a cataclysmic event happened to me. And, I wasn't anything to do with the media. And I was like, what? I can't, I've got to try and be part of trying to stop anything like this happening again. And so most people, they want to do good, and sometimes there's those who have no morals, and there's those who frankly who only see doing good as doing good for themselves. But most people in the media, and certainly the sports media, most people in the sports media are fans. They think the bottom line. I mean, if people get bothered, if you admit who you support, one of them as it never bothered me letting people know, because my view was, you've got to be a supporter to do the job well. I'm glad that football journalists support clubs, because if they didn't, they wouldn't get the feel and the for want of a better word, the passion that's involved, in fandom and all that. So I'm glad they do. But people who supported every sort of club could see the injustice that was going on, and could see the way some of our national institutions were being put in danger, and trying the best to help. And what was for me, what was one of the worst moments is I sat down with Richard Scouser. They have lunches where you go and you all sit around and talk off the record, and it's there's a lot of off the record stuff goes on in journalism. So I'm always amused by when you tweet up about stuff from these things. You go, he's made that up. How would he know that? It's because they talk to you, dickheads. Anyway, but we said to him, I said, there's got to be something in place where I said the horse is probably bolted. But for example, like listed buildings, we should agitate to get some legislation to protect football clubs. They can't be moved without certain preconditions being met. They can't change the kits, because that was when Cardiff changed, from blue to red, and at the whim of an Asian owner. And you can't change the name and all that, because the whole City Tigers, it's all that. And he said, oh, no, he said, the market will sort it all out. And I was like, and the market will never sort it out. And that was depressing, because I thought there was time for Scouser more and the things he did. There was much of what he did that was good, of course. And I always felt his principles in general were in the right place. But things, the effect of some of the things he was involved in was much worse than he imagined. Yeah. So, but the idea that the market would sort it out is not true. A football club isn't just a business. It's there's more to it. There's emotional investment there. It's a sense of a community. It's something that resonates beyond just paying customers and getting results. It's so much more. And I think that's, when people are like laughing about Everton and going, Everton will go under if they go down, and they don't get the stadium built. And everyone thinks it's really funny. It's not. No. Because it's going to have a huge effect on the community. It's going to have a huge effect on the city. And whenever a football club goes under, it's like when a pub shuts. It's never a good thing. It's never a good thing. It's like, so yeah, I take no pleasure in what's happening there.
No, it's not like it's not like, it's an electrical retailer that's gone. There'll be another electrical retailer along soon. I mean, there's shops, there's places empty in town centres, in city centres, because chances like come along and buy companies like Debenham, say, and then run it into the ground and let it go under, and you can guarantee they're still sailing around on their yachts. British
home stores, and then you've got your connection to Everton.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And obviously the Littlewoods name was big, wasn't it? And that's kind of big with both clubs, although it was the Moores family. And it's just, but as we said, and it goes back to Hicks and Gillette, doing a little bit of homework and sort of pretending that they understood about, and they use that word custodians, which has given me the shivers ever since, in all honesty, but it is actually true. It is actually true. The club, and I used to hate seeing stuff that the club was putting out where halfway through a sentence, club would have a capital C, because you knew it was like a bit of a corporate message then, a bit of a legal message then. It was like, we're taking this out of terms and conditions. But the club is the club. That's the thing that we love, that we, when you're watching the game, when you go in the game and all these other things, none of this other stuff bothers you. Watching the game, it's not, you don't give a damn who's sat in the director's box unless it's Kenny and he's going to give you a wave. You're not bothered. It's not something that you're interested in. It's what's on the pitch that matters. And there's a difference between the club that's the corporate entity, Liverpool Football Club and Athletics Ground Limited, and LFC, the initials we've scribbled on school books and things since we were kids and that sort of thing. There's a massive difference, and it's the same with every club. I think, as you said, with pubs as well, I mean, you drive round any part of Liverpool that's kind of generally still the same as it was sort of 20, 30 years ago, and you see all these, well, you still see a lot of sort of derelict pubs, and you still see places that used to be pubs, and then you see gaps where the pub used to be, and they're just gone, and that bit of community's gone. And the thing is, the comparison there is they'll never come back. No one's going to reopen a pub now to replace those that disappeared, because that's it. It's gone. That ship sailed. And if Everton go under, they'll never come back to what they were. It'd be too much to ask. It's very rare that a football club gets formed these days and gets big. It just doesn't happen. So it's important that we do keep vigilant. And again, as you say, FSG are, potentially about as good as we're going to get without having some some government's actually taken us over. But we didn't. We didn't know before FSG came along if we were going to be taken over by a government, because one of the big stories at the time, one of the big links was, well, there were all these sort of chances around who were talking about buying the club, all these people who were showing interest, all these names that were coming out. Obviously, only a few people actually knew how many people had shown that they had the funds or, to be taken seriously. But one massive name we can't get rid of, or one massive nation we can't get away from, is China, because we had a man who was basically telling us that we were being bought by, well, we assume by the Chinese state.
Yeah, well, it's one of those that's China set to buy Liverpool will be thrown at me until the bitter ends. It was quite funny that, because
you didn't even write the headline. People forget that as well.
I didn't write any part of the story. That's the thing about it. It's I was on holiday in Spain.
You were, yeah.
And what was amazing is the journalist involved is a brilliant journalist. She's a brilliant business journalist, and she won lots of awards. She was as well connected as anyone, and she was particularly well connected to the Royal Bank of Scotland, and basically the Royal Bank of Scotland gave her the story.
Yeah. And
so for whatever nefarious means they had, if they were indeed nefarious or they did believe them, it was their story. And actually, I was in Spain, and they called me that morning. They said, we're going to put it on the front page. And I was like, what? Mm-hmm. And, it was like, August is always silly season, as they call it. There's no parliament, so you share the stories and things like that. It's but I was like, knowing that Helen had got the story, I was like, I was completely, it's like, oh, if she's got it, it must be stand up. So I'm not saying, it's like, I made a couple of calls, and the only part I contributed to it was that they were setting up a separate financial instrument to conduct the sale.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be under the company, it was names like that. And that's the one bit of information I sent over, and she forgot to use it. So so my entire contribution to that front page story was nothing but it's like she was so well connected that I just I was thought, well, it must be nailed on, and for them to put it on the front page, it's, and then obviously it's all rebounded. There's it subsequently emerged that Kenny Wang, who was involved in it, was playing a bit fast and loose with the truth, but then why would RBS brief this? Why would because the thing is that the Times as well weren't the only people with the story.
No.
They just went hardest on it. So it's I think that is the most questionable aspect of RBS's involvement in the whole thing, and as I say, it made us a subject of ridicule, and me in particular a subject of ridicule. But do you think I care about that?
No.
It's and the other thing was, and the other big thing is, it showed how much resonance that Liverpool Football Club had.
Yeah. Is
that the Times of London were prepared to put a takeover on the front page, and the thing about that, which is interesting, is that for how many years, for how long would it have been? People wouldn't have been, the papers like the Times wouldn't have taken it seriously.
No.
And what it actually did, it put further pressure on both RBS and Gillette and Hicks to get the sales on. So, overall in the big scheme of things, it's still a bit one of those. I do have a rueful laugh when it's brought up. But, I have to say, the worst thing that happened to me in my entire journalistic career is having to learn about things like pick notes having to learn about financial instruments.
Oh yeah.
When I grew up, I came very late to journalism. So I was going until I was 28 at Hillsborough. So it was another 18 months before I got into the journalism business. So I was coming up on 30 maybe. So I spent all those years just going to match, and I didn't give a flying fuck about who was the owner.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't care. It didn't matter. The whole Bill Shankly thing. It's the Holy Trinity, and and directors don't come into it. And so I just I'd never thought about it, and having to learn about this stuff and deal with people like this, and the people in the Liverpool boardroom. No one have ever lied to me like some of those people, and not the current regime, but during the Gillette and Hicks period, and verifiable untruths. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, that sounds like a contradiction in terms, but I could verify with one phone call that what they were telling me were lies. And
I don't need a VPN. I've got nothing to hide. This is what I used to tell myself before I hooked up with LibertyShield.com. Not only is my home internet now fully encrypted, but I can now access all the websites I want, whenever I want, and do so from absolutely anywhere. As a Liverpool fan, I love to know I can now watch every match, regardless of whether it's on UK TV or not. My Liberty Shield VPN makes sure nothing is blocked, and guarantees me super fast streaming speed throughout that match. You can get connected right now with their software package, which includes a 48-hour no-obligation free trial and instant access to their apps for Apple, Android, Fire TV, PC, Mac, and Android TV. Or go a step further like I have and get one of their pre-configured VPN routers. These small but powerful devices allow you to easily connect every device in your home to VPN, making it the perfect solution for smart TVs, mag boxes, and games consoles. Visit LibertyShield.com today and use coupon code AIVPN25 to get 25% off at checkout.
And it's just like that whole takeover saga. And thankfully, we haven't seen it growing this way for this one. Well, I'm sure it took years off my life.
God, yeah, I think it did for all of us. It was the misinformation, as you say, kept flowing. And the thing is, this wasn't just gossip. I mean, like you mentioned about RBS, this wasn't like, some young person in one of the local RBS branches misunderstanding something or falling for something. Someone's opened a savings account and managed to diddle the bank out of a couple of grand. This was like, we're talking RBS big boys here. We're talking like the big corporate people in the city of London, not some sort of outpost or anything like that. The fact these people were giving this information out, there was obviously some reason for it. But this guy was believable from what everyone says, because obviously we don't understand the financial world that much. We kind of picked it up on the fly as we've gone along and hoped for the best, and we've occasionally thinking, "No, this is correct what I'm saying." But anyway, you kind of get a basic understanding of it. But there were people who work in that world who had little reason to doubt it as well. So it wasn't sort of. It was very, very clever whatever was going on, but I don't know. It's did it make it harder for us to sell the club that this was going on? Because how long were FSG on the scene? Because we didn't know about them till the very last minute, did we?
Well, apparently they were fairly late on it, and which shows you that there weren't that many viable buyers around, which is in common with today.
Mm-hmm.
You'd think people would be queuing up to buy Liverpool Football Club, especially at the knockdown price it went for back in 2010, which I was assured by John Henry was right when I said it was 218, not 300 million, and the rest was an overdraft facility.
Yeah.
So, God, if I would know it was 218 million, I might have asked the bank manager myself and said, look,
yeah.
lend us a few quid. We can make some money out of this. And boy, will they make a lot of money when they eventually do sell. It's and some of that is sheer luck. Well, and some of it's credit to them, the way they've changed things there, and they've done things with the merchandising and the commercial side of things, which they've done better than was being done before. Mind you, that wasn't hard.
No.
but it's but they do deserve a fair amount of credit, and they've never once they haven't taken money out of the club, and they haven't put it into debt.
No, that's the other thing as well, isn't it? Yeah, the debt side of it. I mean, when we're going back to then, I mean, hindsight's a great thing, but I can remember thinking, if the banks would just sort of stand up and say, look, we can give you some sensible finance here. You're good to pay this off. Liverpool was good to pay that debt off. It could have, the money that was coming in, on a sensible repayment, on sensible repayment terms, Liverpool could have easily been self-sufficient with that, given some breathing space. And basically, that's what, to me, FSG did. They gave Liverpool, as a club, the breathing space to get on top of its debts and, to get things paid off. And that's what it needed at the time. It didn't necessarily need, it didn't need sort of. It felt like it was sort of in cardiac arrest. It literally needed life-saving, but maybe it didn't. He just kind of needed pulling to one side, brushing off a little bit, and and being pointed back in the right direction.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we didn't realise is how much of a how much of a sea change the game was undergoing at the time, and it was it was at the point where it was about to become unrecognisable from what we'd seen before. I mean, apart from on the pitch and all that, I mean, in financial terms. Yeah. So I think that's something that we never quite understood at the time. And it really is, it's one of those situations where if we would have known where we were going to be with the way Man City would operate in the next decade, the way UEFA would cravenly back down in front of them, the way the courts would, the way City were able to find loopholes and exploit them, I think we would have been much more. I think we would have been. I don't know. I mean, what would we have said? We probably would have just shook our heads and said, "God knows how it's going to turn out." Yeah, best of luck. But yeah, I mean, the game changed out of all recognition. And for with Fenway's point of view, from how they were going to operate, and they were, they weren't going to go and spend like drunken sailors and like, or like a state-owned entity. Then, they've done remarkably well. If you would have said to me in 2010, these bunch of Americans are going to come in, they're going to win the league, and they're going to win the Champions League, I would have been like, whoa, I'll have a bit of that. It's and so they do deserve credit for that. And to do that in the way the landscape of football was changing is very remarkable. It really is. So so credit to them there, but yeah, they've clearly reached the end of their wanting to do it that way, wanting to do it that way, and they realise that it won't be viable in future. And certainly by the look of the changes in the financial fair play rules, if they are going to just fine clubs who overspend, essentially it's just a tax on overspending, and and City will just go, yeah, fine, that'll suit me. Yeah. Here's some extra money. It's just a levy on signing. So if they do that, you can see why Fenway would run for cover. So yeah, I think whatever happens, we're going to be in a difficult period going forward. But I think the last 5 years have been an age we'll look back on and we'll be grateful we were there for.
Oh yeah, I mean, the thing is, I mean, it's never quiet being a Liverpool fan, is it? There's never like a quiet week. There's always something happening. We say this on these podcasts. We sort of come on and think, what are we going to talk about? And there's always something to talk about. And sometimes it's good fun, sometimes it's not. I think that one memory I've got as well from back then is how much I learned to listen carefully to what people were saying as well, because you'd hear things like, there won't be any debt on the club. Which technically was true, wasn't it? Because technically that debt wasn't on the club. It was on Cop Holdings or the other Cop Holdings or Cop Football or all these other holdings companies that were then linked to companies that were out of, you couldn't scrutinise because they were in some sort of remote offshore island or something. And, this is something I think anyone who's looking at takeovers that are going on now and they're trying to sort of scrutinise and hold people to account is just listen properly to the wording.
Yeah, and the one thing what you shouldn't be able to do is a leverage buyout by a club with money that has been loaned to the club, and that's just that's ridiculous. And of course that happens to Liverpool, it's happened to United, and and you'd hope that the rules prevent similar happening now. But as you say, Jim, the one thing we learned about Maryland, we learned about the British Virgin Islands, we learned about where you could hide money. And, if I ever got very rich and I wanted to do a Rees-Mogg and I wanted to squirrel away me money I should be paying taxes on, I know where to go now. And I wish it didn't.
Yeah, that's the trouble. It's a world that this is the other thing, the other side to it as well. It's a world that we don't really know about or shouldn't know about and don't want to know about. It's not, we don't want that. Football's always been it's always needed sort of someone with a bit of cash to sort of bankroll a club. I think that's been the case for years. It's, so many clubs, even Liverpool back in the olden days, it's thanks to the fortunes of the pools and the home shopping, the football pools and the home shopping, that Liverpool kind of had money to sort of fall back on. But there's always been it was always sensible with the money. Those directors whose names we didn't really know were the people who were running it in a sensible way. But then again, some of those directors down the years have been the same kind of people who've maybe stood in the way of getting it to be where it should be. I think, I'm just remembering to when the club, David Morse tried so hard to sell the club, but didn't want to sell the club. And in the end, I just think the biggest mistake he made was, instead of selling the club, was just getting someone to run it who had the right mind to do it and give them freedom. That's not even having a go at Rick Parry, because I don't think Rick Parry had 100% control. He was, you just need someone who's got that ability, because you're talking about leverage buyouts. If the club had borrowed that money and done it in a way that it was a means to an end, it wasn't just for the sake of it. It wasn't just to get transfers that money was going to be lost. The idea was it would improve and get back. We wouldn't be in this position now, and maybe that club, the club would still be our club. It still is our club, but you know what I mean.
Well, I think if that's the problem. If they could all have seen the future, everyone would have behaved differently, and sadly you can't. It's one of those things where it's I think when you look back now and you see the criticism that Rick Parry got and still receives, and I was one of his harshest critics at the time. Yeah. I think a lot of it was unfair. It's including my own criticism, and again, I think that's another aspect of it where you think, while the Civil War was going on and everyone was taking sides, if we would have worked together, we might have. Because sometimes what we were doing, we were picking the wrong enemies, and that's as much true of the players and some of the former players as it was of people like us. Yeah, and a lot of even within journalism, sort of, you can see some of the old resentments, and they just, they hung around for years, and I say, I was like, come on, we all really were on the same side. We wanted football clubs to be transparent, to be this flag bearer for the community, and to be what we always, not to be a cash cow for the worst sort of rapacious businessmen, and we all wanted that, and yet we were all too busy fighting each other for various periods. And I think that's probably, if I look back, the thing that changed most is I'd realise which side, that we all should have been on. That people who sometimes appeared to be on the other side, I should have thought more closely about what they were trying to do, and we all should have been anti-Christian personal.
God, yeah. I don't know if people know this. If you watch in this country, if you watch Channel 4 and they've got the ident sometimes before a Channel 4 programme, there's a bit that's on a street in Liverpool. There's people kicking a ball around, kids kicking a ball around. Then it lands on top of this great big metal number 4 for Channel 4. But that's in a part of Liverpool where there's a street called Cecil Street. And every time I've driven past there, it just reminds me of what's his name? Christian Mark Cecil Purslow, just known as Cecil to us. Again, he's someone he was definitely involved behind the scenes longer than he ever owned up to. Before he was officially announced as having anything to do with the club, he was definitely there. And again, I still think, the Fernando Torres of finance, whatever he was called. If he was, I mean, we got the Chelsea version, didn't we, of the Fernando Torres of finance? He could have found us money. He could have found us a buyer. He could have done us way lot more than he did if he was as good as he ever said he was.
Yeah, well, that was the problem. I mean, he told everyone that he was going to get together a bit, and he was going to be the owner. He was going to be the lead of in the ownership, and quite a few people got excited by that. And as it turns out, none of it was true. So, and of course, he's over at Villa now, where they've actually done good work finally in employing Unai Emery as the manager, and I think they'll do well. And of course, Pestle will make sure he gets all the praise he can for it. So never shy of hogging the praise.
No. I mean, he's. Another example actually. Let's do this. I mean, it's not so much on the takeover, but I mean, the big reason people are angry now, any Liverpool fans angry now about the ownership, is because of the transfer windows. Basically, people want, to simplify it, for good or bad reasons, people want us to spend 10 times what we're spending in the transfer window, and they want us to get the right players. Yet, isn't it right that one day Perslow went to the media and briefed them off the record, of course, and said things to them that he hadn't even told Rafa about potential signings that we had lined up?
Oh, I think I was off his Christmas card list by then, but yeah, there were plenty of briefings about various stuff which had no truth in reality, So there was a lot of that going on, and yeah, it's all kinds of things were being said, and a lot of them. I mean, that would say, like, one of the worst things about it all was the fact that we were having to go through this, and it's the worst thing in all these things, from Hillsborough through to and I'm not comparing the two, but through to the club, but like, when people that you should be able to trust to tell you the truth lie to you, then something is rotten at the core of this society, because it stretches. And when people come from backgrounds where they think you're dumb enough, you're too dumb to recognise a lie, and class came into it an awful lot in all of these things. It is particularly offensive. So it's but yeah, the lies. Oh man, there's just so many of them.
Yeah, it was never ending, and I think that's another thing when you say about the class thing as well. It's that also is like, you're not important enough for the truth. We're just going to give you this. We're going to fob you off with these lies now because you don't really matter. You're not that important. This'll do. This story will do. You'll fall for that. Now, can you get out of the way? I've got my my Rolls Royce is ready to start moving. It's that kind of like looking down on everyone, and that kind of approach, and that's exactly what. I don't think we've got that with FSG. For all the money they've got, the billionaire status and all the rest of it, they quite clearly live in a different world to me. But I do still think that whether they're doing things the right way or not is another matter, but I do still think that the hearts are definitely in the right place, and they understand what we want from this club. Whether we can give it or not is another matter. It's like, everyone's had who's a parent has had a day when the child's really, really wanted something, and you'd love to give it to them, but I can't, and it's that, we as fans shouldn't be spoiled brats about these things, should we?
No, and I think what the situation is, Personal calling SOS sons of strikers, it's
yes, exactly.
It's the contempt there, and and then it's sort of your difference, so you look for symbolic moments, and it was the moment when I was going to say John Henry back to the Times officers. It was the day of Margaret Thatcher's memorial service.
Oh yeah,
and so I got a cab. Cabby said to me, "Nothing's going east, mate, with this service on." He said, if I was you, I'd just get the tube. You'll be way quicker. And I said to John, thinking, oh well, good. I don't have to take him back to the office with me, so that I can get onto somewhere. I said, I've got to take the tube. I said, maybe do it another day. And he goes, what's this tube? He goes, the underground. He goes, I'll just go with you. And, it's And so I had to take him on the tube, and the stupidest question I've ever asked in my entire career. I said to him, as we got have you got an Oyster card? Of course he didn't have an Oyster card. But anyway, he was quite happy on the tube going there, and I can't imagine. I think certain other people who have been involved in the club would regard taking public transport as below their dignity.
Yeah, beneath them. Yeah, they don't want to go in there with the common unwashed people, do they? Yeah, well, I think, you know what, we spent an hour talking about the takeover and the stuff, and it went on for years. There was so much going on, and I think, if we sat down and looked through old emails and things now, we'd probably find things we've completely forgotten about. There was just so much going on, but I think the two things to take from it was they were very bad times for the club. We're literally talking seriously. I remember being on Sky Sports News talking about the club going into receivership and saying at the moment it felt like that was better than the way things were, because at least then we'd be able to kind of start again, and instead of being left in limbo like we were, and hopefully, not go completely out of existence. But that's how desperate they were. They were the dark times, but the good times were the fact that, we made new friends, including people we'd never met and didn't meet for a couple of years later, according to that dossier. It was that togetherness. And again, that's not the shit we should be fighting over. We shouldn't be fighting, again, not to make a direct comparison, we shouldn't be fighting for things like Hillsborough. We shouldn't be fighting for things like who owns the club. But the bottom line is, when you're a football fan, what you do is you work together for your team. You're the 12th man. And I think, we were the 12th man. And as bad as it was, there were some good times as well in all that, in terms of, being part of that fight was so important, and so something I'll always look back on I wouldn't say fondly, but with a bit of a smile to some extent, because we fought, and I think we kind of won.
Yeah, and there was some moments of crass stupidity. For example, when we walked into the Crack that night, and Gillette was sitting in the back room, and this was my chance to get him, to pin him down, and of course that was my round. So I went to bar, and someone saw me and tipped him off, and he was out the back, so I had to chase him, come back, Mr. Gillette, and the gentleman from the Times, and it's one of them, but typical Scouse. It's my round. I'll just go to the bar first, then I'll grab him. Yeah. You wouldn't. You'd never. You'd never ever want to be known for missing out on your round, would you? So that. Yeah, I'd be getting slagged now. Oh, you know what? You used Gillette as an excuse, to when it was his round to get away with it.
Can't believe he was in there, to be honest. I didn't think.
Oh, it was very, very funny. It was, that was a mad weekend at the big protest march, and it was I remember going into the press box at Anfield for the half-12 kickoff against Man United, and I'd been up half the night plotting with various characters, and obviously there was a lot of drink taken, then up to the march and more drink taken, and I sat down next to Henry Winter in the press box, and he was all dressed in a suit and all that, and I looked and smelt like a tramp. Happy days.
Oh, we'll have to go through them again, I think. Not go through the days itself again, but talk about them again. I don't want to go through all that again. Yeah, meeting up and protesting and marching and having to do all these banners and stuff. But you know what? The truth is, if we have to, we will. Forget your sort of protests that aren't for real, like you've tried to do last weekend, whoever that was. Wait till you really need to protest. Keep your powder dry.
Yeah.
That's the thing to keep in your mind. Anyone who's worried about the club now, listen, between us as a fan base, we'll not let them mess us about. We will sort it, and as we've done before, we'll always do again. Thank you so much for listening, and thanks, Tony, for sharing those memories as well, because they were good. They were good times as much as they were bad, and we will be back again soon with another episode of Scouser Tommies. Thanks for listening. Keep an ear out for all the other stuff on Anfield Index as well, and we will see you soon.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this Anfield Index show. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel so future podcasts find their way to your device automatically. There's nothing quite like fan engagement, and we'd love to know what you think of anything discussed on this show. The best way to get in touch is over on our free Discord community, where both podcasters and listeners debate the hottest LFC topics 24/7. Sign up free now at AnfieldIndex.com/Discord. You won't regret it. You can also follow us on Twitter at Anfield Index, and find us on Facebook by searching for Anfield Index. Oh, and before you go, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast app. It only takes a couple of seconds, and it means the world to the people who create these free shows.